Hello everyone, I'm Sud Sivaji, CEO of Aperam. Today, I'm joined by Tim DiMarlo, our board member and our strategic advisor for public affairs. Welcome, Tim. Thank you actually for joining us today and taking the time to discuss an important topic. We wanted to address a topic which is very important in the discussion in the steel industry. The Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, which is being introduced by the European Commission and causing a lot of questions amongst our different stakeholders. So Tim, to start off, may I ask you, what can you briefly tell us what CBAM is?
Thank you, Sudha. So CBAM is the European Carbon Border Mechanism under the European Green Deal. It makes sure that imported goods reflect the carbon cost of their production, just like European producers have done under the EU ETS, so the Emission Trading System, which is in place since 2005, and supports the European targets to cut emissions by at least 55% by 2030 and reach climate neutrality by 2050. So specifically, CBAM applies to direct emission, so the scope 1 of steel production, as well as for certain emission of key precursor materials, which are part of the scope 3, such as the ferronickel and ferrochromium. This applies only for stainless steel. In practice, the CBAM encourages producers outside the European border to adopt more sustainable practices, so conditioning market access on lower emission. It's not just compliant, it's about promoting global decarbonization.
That's great. So Tim, when exactly does CBAM come into effect and why is it so important for the European industry?
So CBAM is full in force from the 1st of January 2026, but it will be progressive and the ramp up it will last until 2034. Its primary goal it is to maintain a level playing field. So producers in countries with lower environmental standards should face carbon costs that reflect their higher emission. This will protect European industry, which have invested heavily in decarbonization from unfair competition. By ensuring carbon price equity between domestic and imported goods, the CBAM also discourages the relocation of European industry to regions with weaker environmental regulation. And what is the result? The result is jobs for Europe, sustainable practice, and a stronger European industry.
So implementation is clearly key. Tim, can you explain why CBAM is ramped up progressively and what is the role of default values in this process?
So CBAM is introduced gradually to avoid a shock to trade and to the industries. At the start, importers receive a partial exemption from carbon cost, similar to the transition support that European steel producers receive today. The support is reduced step by step and will be fully phased out by 2034, when all imports will pay the full carbon cost. Importers must report how much CO2 is linked to the products they bring into Europe. For this, they can use two ways: by using the real emission data or by using the standard values set by the European Commission. If they use real data, it must be audited and confirmed by an independent verifier to make sure it follows European rules. If they cannot provide verified data, the European Commission automatically applies standard default value. This prevents companies from underreporting emission and ensure imports still face a realistic carbon cost. The European Commission updated these default values and published them in December last year.
So Tim, that means default values are indeed default. That sounds obvious, but can you give us an example?
Okay, as an example, we can take the carbon default footprint of Indonesia, which is 8.7 tons of CO2 per ton of cold rolled stainless steel. After considering the equivalent free allocation to Europeans and adjustment to ensure a realistic carbon cost, this value remains about 8.3 tons of CO2 per ton of stainless steel. This applies not only to Indonesia, but also, for instance, to Taiwan, whose default value is set at the same level because its production largely relies on Indonesian semi-products. At the end, the CBAM cost of importing stainless is the multiplication of the emission and the CO2 ton price at that moment. In order to ensure that the applicable default value is that of the country where the steel is actually made, we also support a melted and pour rule. This will keep CBAM fair and credible and avoid circumvention.
One clarification, Tim, because you talk about tons, but it is also about a price for CO2, right?
So every time that you consider ton of CO2, you have to consider that for each ton of CO2, you have to pay the cost of the CO2 at that moment. The CO2 cost is in a market, in the ETS trading system, and at the moment you will import, you will pay that cost.
If you now go into some details, does CBAM apply to an entire site or just product specific or to part of the tons? How does it handle across different production sites?
In simpler terms, all steel from a given installation has the same emissions, whether it's made from primary materials or scrap, or whether they come from different stainless steel families, austenitics, ferritics, duplex. This approach prevents resource shuffling and ensures fairness.
Thank you very much, Tim. Thanks for taking the time to explain to us and why CBAM is very important to the industry and why the specifics of the CBAM matter. I hope we managed to clarify what CBAM is and why it matters for the European steel industry. I would like to add that as a leading European stainless producer, Aperam has long prioritized sustainability and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. CBAM is sometimes mistakenly seen as a protectionist measure, but this is entirely incorrect. Its purpose is to promote efficient energy use and reduce the global carbon rules. In line with CBAM rules, if a country produces stainless steel at the same European standards, they should not and will not be subject to CBAM costs. An effective CBAM is crucial to restoring a level playing field, ensuring all producers contributing to the European market meet equivalent environmental standards. It supports the EU's climate objectives while promoting global sustainable practices, reinforcing both environmental responsibility and industrial competitiveness. At Aperam, we remain committed to sustainability, transparency, and responsible growth.